Some pains seem to have learned how to breathe within us. They are silent presences that blend into daily life, altering the rhythm of the body and the way the eyes perceive the world. But something curious happens when consciousness begins to observe that pain without fear. It becomes disorganized, as if the very quantum field of being, once observed, began to rewrite itself. Each memory returns to being a particle in transit, seeking a new state of coherence. In that instant, suffering ceases to be the invisible enemy and becomes a portal, not of escape, but of return. A return to the original energy, where nothing needs to be fixed, only remembered. There are pains that seem to have found a way to remain, even when everything around us has already changed. They are patterns that reproduce themselves in new forms, new people, new situations, yet carry the same background sound, like a note that insists on vibrating even after the music has ended. This repetition is not punishment, nor bad luck. It is a call from consciousness, asking that our gaze turn to the point where something essential has not yet been understood. Every time pain returns, it brings with it the chance to decipher what lies hidden beneath the surface of reactions. Quantum consciousness acts as a highly precise mirror. It amplifies what has been denied, displaces what has been hidden, repeats what still lacks light. And this repetition is not linear. It occurs in spirals that come closer and move apart, until finally the inner observer recognizes that there is nothing to be defeated, only seen. When we look at a painful memory without the intention of eliminating it, something changes in the structure of perception. It is as if the mental circuit that sustained that pattern begins to lose energy. Conscious observation dissolves the link between memory and identity. What once seemed part of who we are begins to reveal itself only as an energetic movement, information vibrating in search of new meaning. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible moment when pain ceases to be an event and becomes a frequency. From then on, the body, which once reacted automatically, begins to respond with more space. The heart slows down, breathing becomes less defensive, and the mind loses the urgency to find someone to blame. This is the point where awakening begins, when repetition stops being suffering and becomes a signal. Quantum consciousness does not seek to erase what we have lived, it seeks to integrate. Everything that was repressed retains a vibrational charge that must be reintegrated into the full flow of experience. While that energy remains isolated, life creates situations that reproduce the same pattern, attempting to complete the circuit. That is why we meet different people who trigger the same wounds. The inner universe tries to close the interrupted field of coherence. Observing this requires silent courage. It is not about intellectual analysis, but radical presence. Sitting before one's own pain without the hurry to heal it is like entering a resonance chamber where the oldest sound of being echoes. In that silence, we begin to perceive that suffering is not the problem. It is the language. It speaks through the body's contractions, through fatigue that arises without reason, through memories that return when the world slows down. When the inner observer becomes more stable, the pattern begins to lose meaning. The same event that once provoked reaction is now perceived as an echo, and the echo only persists while there is an inner wall to return it. When the wall falls, the sound dissipates. Thus, each repetition is, in fact, an opportunity to notice where there are still walls erected within us. Quantum consciousness works through coherence, and coherence manifests only when the once fragmented parts begin to recognize each other again. Therefore, as long as we avoid looking at what hurts, we keep the field unbalanced. Awakening is not a sudden leap, but the result of continuous attention. It is a process in which pain itself, once feared, becomes the teacher guiding the path back to wholeness. There is a kind of tenderness that arises when we understand this. Anger softens, resentment loses importance, and what once seemed like injustice begins to look like a silent agreement between different layers of the same soul. Each repetition becomes a living lesson in self-awareness. Each person who awakens amid pain becomes a lucid particle within the collective fabric, helping to reorganize the field of human experience. And perhaps this is the strange evidence. Pain only persists because consciousness has not yet completed the vibrational learning it carries. When the gaze becomes sufficiently stable, pain ceases to move in circles and begins to move in an ascending spiral. The same event that once imprisoned now liberates. What was repetition becomes recognition. Thus, suffering is not the enemy of evolution, but its translator. It points to the place where energy stopped flowing. When we allow consciousness to touch that point with clarity and tenderness, what was once a wound becomes a portal. And each time that portal opens, the inner universe reconfigures itself a little closer to the harmony it has always been trying to remember. Some pains no longer hurt in the body, yet they continue to inhabit gestures, pauses, and silences. It is as if part of us has grown accustomed to existing with unnecessary density, carrying memories that no longer serve a purpose, but still vibrate as if time had never passed. This is the invisible weight, the energetic field of wounds trapped in the past, projecting shadows onto the present. When consciousness becomes more awakened, we begin to perceive that much of what we call current suffering does not originate in the present, but is the echo of old experiences that were never fully integrated. The mind, in its desire for protection, archives those pains, encapsulates emotions, and creates narratives to make sense of what was lived. But the body does not forget. It stores vibrational records that, even without conscious memory, continue to shape reactions, fears, and choices. Each unresolved memory creates a small distortion in the field of inner coherence. It is as if vital energy stops flowing freely and begins to spin around itself, keeping alive a story that has already ended. These small energy twists accumulate and form a kind of invisible emotional mass, making us feel tired for no reason, discouraged without cause, anxious without direction. It is not the present that weighs. It is the accumulation of times we did not know how to release. When we look at this phenomenon through a quantum lens, we understand that psychological time is not linear. Emotional memories behave as active vibrational fields, coexisting in the same space of the now. That is why we can live a moment of genuine joy and yet feel an old sadness arise without apparent explanation. Consciousness, as it begins to expand, starts to identify these frequency crossings and dissolve the links between the self of today and the fragments of pain that belong to another moment. There is something deeply liberating in recognizing that the weight we feel is no longer happening. It is merely being remembered. Old pain does not seek to punish. It seeks to be understood. It returns as energy longing for reabsorption. It is like a loose fragment of the self knocking on the door of consciousness to be reintegrated. The problem is that, often, we mistake this visit for a relapse. We believe we are regressing, when in truth, we are simply crossing the threshold of healing. In this process, the body becomes the most faithful map. Tightness in the chest, pain in the back, weight on the shoulders. Each sign is a vibrational coordinate pointing to a point in the past that is still active. Observing these signs without resistance is like opening a portal between inner times. When we breathe attentively within that sensation, without trying to understand or solve it, the energy begins to move. Consciousness acts as light, passing through the fabric of the unconscious, and what was imprisoned begins to reorganize. In quantum terms, observation alters the observed field. When we bring true presence to old pain, we modify the information structure that sustains it. What was once a rigid record becomes a malleable wave. The memory ceases to be a frozen fact and returns to being pure possibility, ready to be re-signified. At that point, the past is not erased, but decoded. The event continues to exist, but the emotional charge associated with it dissipates, freeing vital energy that was once blocked. The invisible weight begins to dissolve when we stop fighting it. True acceptance is not passivity. It is an intelligent field that recognizes the moment to release what has already served its purpose. Just as the body exhales air that no longer contains oxygen, consciousness must exhale memories that no longer sustain life. This exhalation is a movement of surrender, and surrender, in turn, is the highest gesture of trust consciousness can offer to its own flow. Relief does not happen all at once. It spreads slowly, like light finding cracks in an old wall. Suddenly, small gestures become lighter. Getting out of bed, speaking to someone, listening to silence. Everything begins to feel less heavy. The energy once used to keep old pains alive begins to convert into present vitality. The body seems to breathe better, and inner time realigns with the natural rhythm of life. When we look around, we realize that everyone, to some degree, walks carrying fragments of what they no longer are. Each human being is a constellation of memories asking for renewal. Quantum consciousness, as it expands, does not erase the past. It reintegrates it, allowing the wisdom contained in pain to become creative force. What once was weight transforms into sacred density, matter of learning, fuel for new states of perception. Thus, the process of freeing oneself from old wounds is not an act of forgetting, but of recognition. To recognize what has been and allow it to return to the greater field, where everything that exists finds its natural place. When that happens, lightness does not come as euphoria, but as serenity. It is the inner silence of one who finally understands that the present is the only real time, and in it, no old pain holds the power to remain. For a long time, we were conditioned to see suffering as punishment, a balance that life charges for our mistakes or choices. This belief took roots so deeply in the human psyche that we began to fear the very act of feeling pain. We avoid it, deny it, run from it, and by doing so, we give pain the power to grow in the shadows. But there is a moment when consciousness, tired of running, decides to look it in the eye. It is at this moment that something reverses. Suffering ceases to be punishment and becomes a language, a message written in vibrational layers, asking to be decoded. Quantum consciousness operates through observation, and to observe, in this context, is not a passive act, it is a creative event. When attention turns inward with authenticity, it alters the field it observes. It is as if a new narrative began to be written within the same experience. What once seemed like pure pain begins to show itself as a process of reorganization. The energy of suffering does not disappear, but changes form. From contraction to expansion, from noise to coherence. Each painful emotion is a fragment of information misaligned with the natural flow of consciousness. When we resist it, the misalignment intensifies. When we welcome it, the field readjusts. This is the movement of rewriting. Suffering is not the end of balance, but the sign that consciousness is trying to reconfigure itself at a deeper level. It is the natural process of the being's vibrational update. Emotional pain is not an error in the system. It is the system itself, informing that something needs to be reintegrated. Suffering does not come from outside. It is born at the point where vital energy meets resistance. The greater the blockage, the greater the sensation of pain. But when the inner gaze opens, resistance begins to dissolve, and the energy that was trapped turns into clarity. Thus, the pain once feared reveals itself as the laboratory where consciousness tests its own plasticity. This laboratory is not theoretical. It manifests in the body, in relationships, in everyday situations that destabilize us. It is in these moments that the old and the new meet, and consciousness must choose, repeat the reaction, or create a new pattern. Suffering is, therefore, the field where inner freedom is truly experienced. And each time we choose to respond with presence, the story changes a little. The internal script begins to be rewritten. There comes a point where the rational mind tries to resist this process. It has been trained to seek control, not transformation. For it, suffering must have an external cause, a culprit, a logical reason. But quantum consciousness does not operate by linear logic. It operates by resonance. It perceives that what we call pain is, in fact, a vibration out of step with the original state of harmony. Thus, healing does not come from understanding why we suffer, but from allowing the frequency to readjust naturally. This readjustment happens when we stop interpreting and start feeling with full attention. The mind wants to solve, the heart simply witnesses, and it is the act of witnessing, without an agenda, that opens the field for rewriting. Suffering then ceases to be noise and becomes coded language, a letter from the unconscious itself asking to be read. When we manage to read what the pain is really saying, the energy that sustained it dissolves. What remains is a new silence, dense and luminous at the same time. Inner rewriting does not erase the past, it alters its meaning. The memory still exists, but it does not wound. It becomes neutral data, part of the memory of a being that has matured. In this new state, consciousness understands that pain did not come to punish, but to teach the art of adaptation. Human experience, after all, is a continuous process of vibrational editing, with each challenge a chance to align body, mind, and energy to a more coherent pattern. There is something deeply compassionate in this realization. When we see suffering as part of the alchemy of consciousness, we stop fighting it and begin to collaborate with the process. What was once despair becomes surrender. What was once guilt turns into understanding. And at the center of this movement, a nearly sacred sensation arises, that nothing is truly wrong, only in transformation. This transformation is neither linear nor predictable. At times, we feel we have regressed, that the pain has returned with more force. But what is happening is that consciousness is revisiting subtler layers of the same pattern, refining the rewriting process. It is like restoring an ancient text, cleaning line by line until the original meaning can shine again. Patience is the most precise instrument of this restoration. Over time, pain stops being seen as an enemy and comes to be recognized as a teacher. Each suffering lived becomes a deciphered code. Each tear, data reintegrated into the greater field. And when consciousness reaches this point, the vibration changes tone. A state of serenity emerges that does not depend on the absence of challenges, but on the deep understanding that everything that happens cooperates with awakening. Thus, suffering ceases to be punishment and reveals itself as process, the invisible movement through which consciousness updates itself. It is life writing itself in new frequencies, using pain as ink and time as the page. When we understand this, pain no longer needs to be avoided. It can be lived with respect, wisdom, and even gratitude, because we know that as it unravels, a new chapter is being written within us. When consciousness begins to expand and pain, little by little, loses the power to control our reactions, something unexpected happens. The mind resists. It stirs, creates noise, tries to restore the old state of tension. This resistance is not malice or weakness. It is an instinct for preservation. The mind was shaped to seek predictability, and suffering, as uncomfortable as it is, offers a kind of stability. It is a familiar pain, a known territory. Its absence, by contrast, is an unknown void, and the unknown is what most frightens the mental system. For years, the mind learned to organize itself around pain. It built identities, stories, and survival strategies from it. Suffering became a reference axis. I am what happened to me. I am what I had to endure. I am what I learned from loss. When quantum consciousness begins to dissolve these bonds, the mind feels it is losing the ground beneath it. It defends itself by creating distractions, doubts, and even emotional relapses, all to keep the old structure functioning. Resistance is the mind's last cry as it tries to protect what it believes to be its function. Maintaining the continuity of the narrative. It fears disappearing. After all, if pain no longer defines who we are, what remains? This is the most delicate point of awakening, the moment when silence begins to replace noise. And for a mind accustomed to control, silence is threatening. It represents the collapse of all the references that once sustained identity. At this stage, many mistake resistance for spiritual relapse. They think they are regressing, that they have lost focus, when in fact they are crossing the boundary between the conditioned self and the conscious self. The mind fights because it is losing its central role. It tries to regain control by launching thoughts that reactivate pain. You haven't changed. This won't last. You're just deluding yourself. These voices are not truths. They are echoes of the old vibrational field trying to reassert itself. The quantum field of consciousness, however, is patient. It does not go to war with the mind. It observes it. Pure observation has the power to disarm the conflict because it does not feed resistance with judgment. When we observe the mind resisting without trying to control it, it begins to reorganize. Attention itself, when neutral, acts as a healing frequency. The mind realizes it does not need to fight to exist. It can reposition itself as a tool, not as the center. Gradually, the inner space expands. Pain, once hypnotic, comes to be seen from the outside, like a wave that comes and goes. The mind, which once confused itself with this wave, begins to recognize itself as the ocean that contains it. This shift in perspective is profound and irreversible. It marks the beginning of a new relationship with one's own thinking. Pain ceases to be a mental phenomenon and becomes a movement of energy observed with serenity. But the process is not linear. At times, the mind seems to go backward, trying to recover old emotional habits. It relives memories, dramatizes situations, projects fears. All of this is part of the transition. Awakening does not eliminate the mind, it educates it. Resistance becomes subtler, harder to detect, like a fog that disguises clarity. And it is at this point that conscious attention needs to remain steady, not through force, but through gentleness. There comes a moment when the inner silence begins to expand so much that the mind, exhausted from fighting, surrenders. This surrender is not defeat, it is reconciliation. The mind finally recognizes that it can rest. It discovers it does not need to control pain to be safe. It realizes that safety does not come from predictability, but from coherence with the present. When this happens, the vibrational field shifts frequency. The energy once used to resist converts into lucidity. This is the beginning of true freedom. The instant we realize that the mind is not an enemy, but part of the machinery of consciousness. It merely tries to fulfill its protective function. The difference is that now, the one who observes is greater than what thinks. The mind comes to serve the flow of consciousness, not the other way around. Pain, once amplified by reactive thoughts, becomes merely a sign of adjustment, a transitory vibration within a system in constant expansion. In this new state, serenity is not the absence of thought, but clarity in its presence. Silence is not emptiness, it is fullness without noise. Pain may even arise, but it no longer finds an echo in the same place. It dissipates faster because there is no longer anyone feeding it with interpretations. The mind, now aligned with the heart, learns to trust the field it once feared, and suffering, without fuel, loses its ability to dominate. Seen from this angle, the mind's resistance is proof that the awakening process is truly happening. It is the sign that consciousness is taking the helm and that the old system is coming undone. When we recognize this, we stop fighting the mind itself and begin to accompany it with compassion. Each time we observe it resisting without reacting, we help dissolve a layer of fear, and with each layer dissolved, a new level of peace takes hold. In the end, awakening does not destroy the mind, it illuminates it. The resistance was merely the fear of the light, and when the light becomes familiar, the mind understands it never lost control. It merely transformed it into consciousness. At this point, suffering no longer serves as language. It becomes decoded memory, reintegrated energy. The being then breathes lightly, aware that peace did not come because everything was resolved, but because the need to resist finally ceased. A memory in itself is not the problem. What imprisons us is the way the body holds it, the way emotion crystallizes into dense vibration, impeding the natural flow of energy. Every stored pain behaves like a rotating field, spinning around a core of resistance. Quantum consciousness acts exactly at that point, where time seems to have stopped. It does not eliminate the past, it reorders what has been frozen. When an old memory emerges, it is not a setback, but an invitation for consciousness to act as observer. When observed with presence, the memory loses rigidity. The emotional particles that once vibrated out of harmony begin to align to a new frequency. The simple act of seeing clearly already alters the field. The pain that seemed fixed begins to unfold into pure information. What was a wound becomes data, and data can be resignified. Quantum physics describes something similar. The observer influences the behavior of the particle. In the field of consciousness, the same occurs. When attention is full and free of judgment, it changes the vibrational quality of what it observes. Thus, the memory ceases to emit the vibration of trauma and begins to emit the vibration of understanding. The event remains the same, but the energy associated with it is different. It is life rewriting itself without erasing a single word, only changing the intonation. The body perceives this change before the mind. Breathing becomes more fluid, the shoulders relax, the heart gains room to beat in a natural rhythm. This transformation is physical, measurable, real. When the energy of suffering reorganizes, the entire system realigns. The mind loses the impulse to revisit the pain, the body abandons its defense, and the emotional field returns to vibrate in coherence. The memory, once dense, now acts as a source of wisdom. The process is delicate because it asks for surrender. The memory does not need to be pushed out of consciousness, but welcomed as part of the path itself. Every time we try to force forgetting, we reinforce the bond with what we are trying to erase. When we simply allow it to exist, resistance dissolves. Observation becomes an alchemical act, transforming density into light, disconnection into flow, pain into insight. Painful memories are, in essence, fragments of energy misaligned with the original rhythm of the being. When reintegrated, the field regains coherence. It is like a symphony in which dissonant notes are gently adjusted until they return to the correct tone. And the most remarkable thing is that this inner change resonates outward. People, situations, and relationships begin to respond to the new frequency emitted. The quantum field, sensitive to vibration, reorganizes external circumstances according to the internal pattern we sustain. The memory that once generated fear can become a point of power. That which wounded can come to generate sensitivity, empathy, subtle perception. When pain converts into wisdom, it ceases to be a limit and becomes a portal. Quantum consciousness transforms what was stuck into creative potential. The energy once used to keep the memory alive is free to create, inspire, and heal. The secret is to remain available. It is not about understanding the past, but allowing it to reveal itself in a new light. Each time the inner observer chooses not to react, the field expands. It is a continuous process of reconfiguration. Dense energy rises in frequency. The body learns a new rhythm, and the mind discovers it does not need to control. The memory then ceases to be story and becomes useful vibration. Over time, the past loses the power to interrupt the present. It becomes texture, not a wound. What once was pain turns into depth. The being matures not by forgetting what it lived, but by integrating everything it lived into a broader pattern of coherence. Consciousness comes to recognize that every experience, even the most difficult, has cooperated to expand the field of perception. This transmutation is not mystical, it is physiological. The body is the laboratory of consciousness. When we release a low-frequency memory, the system's vibration changes, and the universe, sensitive to this change, responds with new opportunities, encounters, and synchronicities. Energy does not disappear. It merely takes on a new form, lighter, clearer, more coherent. If an old memory still pulses within you, allow it to be observed now. Take a deep breath and notice how the body reacts. Do not run, do not force, just see. The conscious gaze is the bridge between pain and liberation. The field reorganizes at the very moment you agree to see what you previously avoided. And when you feel something inside soften, maybe an ancient weight, maybe an almost forgotten tension, share this moment. Like this video and write in the comments. I am allowing my consciousness to rewrite the past into a new vibration. This sentence is not just a symbolic gesture, it is a vibrational command. Each word spoken with intention helps consolidate the new frequency in the field. And by doing so, you become an active part of the silent movement that transforms pain into light. The first silence after pain is usually the most disconcerting. It is as if the body, accustomed to the constant noise of suffering, did not know what to do with the newly opened space. The absence of the old tension feels strange, almost like a lack. For a long time, suffering was the point of reference, the background sound that gave shape to existence. When it begins to dissolve, everything that was built upon its presence becomes destabilized. The mind tries to locate itself, but the inner map has changed. Deep down, it is not the pain that is lost, but the identity that was born from it. Each old wound built a way of existing. The careful one who fears failing, the strong one who never cries, the skeptic who no longer believes in promises. They are molds that fix themselves in the body, vibrational patterns that determined choices, loves, and distances. When consciousness begins to rewrite these patterns, these forms start to crack. The energy that once sustained the pain is released, and the character that depended on it loses footing. What arises in that instant is a kind of silent mourning, not for something that was taken, but for something that can no longer be sustained. The self that knew who it was because it suffered begins to unravel, and the emptiness that appears is, at the same time, uncomfortable and sacred. It is the interval between the end of one story and the beginning of another that has not yet been written. The vibrational field at this point is suspended. Nothing needs to be resolved. Everything is being reconfigured. The body feels it first, a light tiredness, a sense of mismatch, as if the skin were a little looser than the being itself. The nervous system adapts to a slower rhythm. The heart tries to understand the calm. The absence of pain can be confusing for those who lived many years interpreting the world through it. The mind looks for old points of reference and does not find them. It is at this moment that many people confuse liberation with loss because they do not know who they will be without the narrative that sustained them. Quantum consciousness, however, does not erase anything, it integrates. Everything that was lived remains as vibrational data, but now reorganized in new coherence. The identities created by pain are not discarded. They are absorbed, decoded, and converted into wisdom. Compassion arises when we recognize that even the masks were forms of love, legitimate attempts to protect life. When we look at them with gratitude, the dissolution process becomes smoother. The mind tries to resist. It looks for a definition, for a new role to replace the old one. The ego asks, "Who am I without my story?" The answer does not come in words, but in sensation. It is the silence itself that answers. Little by little, one realizes that what was left behind was not the self, but the structure that kept it from breathing. The being, contrary to what fear suggests, does not shrink by losing identities, it expands. This process is comparable to changing frequency. The emotional body, previously vibrating in dense tones of self-protection, begins to emit a higher, more stable note. At first, this vibration seems cold, as if something vital had been lost. But as the field adjusts, it becomes clear that the heat of the old pain was only friction, the constant effort to keep the identity standing. When the friction ceases, what remains is stillness. In the space that opens, new perceptions begin to blossom. Small things gain brightness, the sound of breathing, the light crossing the air, the texture of the moment. The energy previously concentrated on surviving now spreads, nourishing feeling. Life reveals itself in details that were always there, but that the noise of suffering hid. This new sensitivity is the first sign that the heart is beginning to occupy the place that once belonged to pain. Even so, attachment to the old self persists for a time. The mind visits the old patterns, tests whether they still fit, tries to fit itself back in, and each attempt fails because the field no longer vibrates at the same frequency. The old pain may even be remembered, but not found again. The body no longer responds to the wound's command. This is the evidence that the rewriting is complete. Suffering has ceased to be living matter and has become only a record. The sense of loss diminishes as trust grows. It is necessary to allow oneself to exist without definitions, without the need to understand the new state. Consciousness, when it stabilizes, reveals something that was hidden beneath all identities, a continuous, serene, silent presence. It is the original field of being, intact since always, waiting for pain to fulfill the role of leading the return to it. Leaving behind the identities created by suffering is not abandoning who we were, but freeing what we are. It is recognizing that each difficult story was a step, and that the love learned after pain has a different texture, simpler, clearer, freer. At that point, what seemed like loss becomes expansion. Emptiness reveals itself as a space for creation, and consciousness, finally, can rest in that which was never lost, the presence that exists before any name, before any pain, before any story. When the heart finally aligns with the rhythm of consciousness, something silent yet powerful begins to pulse in the depths of being. It is not an event that announces itself with euphoria, but a change of state that happens from the inside out, almost without noise. It is as if a new field of energy appeared, not because something was added, but because everything that obstructed the flow ceased to exist. The mind, once tired of fighting pain, surrenders. The body, once tense, opens, and the heart, free from the need to protect itself, begins to emit a new vibration, that of coherence. This coherence is not an idea or an ideal. It is a physical sensation, measurable in the body. The breath deepens effortlessly, thoughts slow down, and there is a kind of synchrony between emotion, perception, and action. What was once fragmented begins to move as a single organism. The energy that was previously used to sustain internal conflicts now circulates freely, and this circulation creates a kind of inner luminosity. It is not a metaphor, it is real perception. The body seems to emit light, and this light is the natural language of the heart when it is aligned with consciousness. In this state, life does not change by magic, it changes in texture. Situations continue to exist, but the way of moving through them is transformed. Reactivity gives way to presence, and suffering, which once dictated movements, becomes information. The aligned heart does not seek to avoid pain or cling to pleasure. It simply recognizes the flow as living intelligence. The energy that springs from this alignment is stable, not because nothing shakes it, but because there is a deeper trust sustaining everything. This trust is born from the direct perception that the inner and outer universe are a single field of exchange. When the heart vibrates in coherence, the reality around it responds in the same tone. Coincidences become signs, encounters gain purpose, decisions seem to arise naturally. What once was effort becomes spontaneous response. Quantum consciousness does not impose, it guides with delicacy. And the heart, when attuned to it, recognizes this guidance and follows it with serenity. The emergence of this new energy is also perceptible in spaces of silence. Silence ceases to be absence and becomes full presence. Within it, everything seems to vibrate in a harmonic rhythm. There is a kind of pulsation that is not of the body, but of life itself moving through it. It is in this state that the human being becomes a clear channel again, a passage between universal energy and individual form. Each gesture, each word, each breath begins to carry this frequency. The heart is the translator of the quantum field. While the mind analyzes and measures, the heart feels and organizes. It recognizes patterns of coherence and turns them into direction. When the heart's vibration stabilizes, consciousness can anchor itself in the present continuously. Psychological time, which once dragged along memories and anxieties, dissolves. The now expands, and within this now, the flow moves without resistance. The energy that arises from this union is creative. Ideas appear with clarity, not as mental impulses, but as insights that sprout from silence. Human relationships gain depth because they are no longer attempts to complete what is lacking, but expressions of what overflows. Love ceases to be a search and becomes a natural state. This is the vibrational signature of consciousness in coherence. Everything created from it carries stability, beauty, and purpose. What is curious is that, as the field becomes more cohesive, the external world begins to reflect this harmony. Conflicts lose intensity, opportunities align, the body seems to heal faster. None of this is coincidence, it is field physics. Energy in coherence generates order in the surroundings. The heart, when it vibrates in sync with consciousness, acts as a central oscillator that reorganizes the environment by resonance. And this reorganizing does not depend on effort. It happens naturally because the more stable vibration tends to harmonize the others. The mind, in this new state, learns a different role. It observes and cooperates. It ceases to be the center and becomes an instrument. The old need to understand everything dissolves into direct trust in experience. What once was a search becomes expression. It is as if the being finally learned to dance to the rhythm the universe has always played, but which the inner noise kept it from hearing. The heart, now tuned, recognizes the melody. Living in this flow does not mean escaping contrasts. The difference is that contrast is no longer seen as a threat. It is perceived as the natural movement of energy. Just as the sea alternates between waves and calm, consciousness alternates between expansion and retreat. The aligned heart understands this dance and does not resist. It knows that the flow of life does not need to be controlled, only accompanied. When this new energy stabilizes, life becomes less about doing and more about allowing. Each act, no matter how small, carries conscious intention. Vital energy is no longer wasted on resistance or guilt. It converts into clarity, lightness, and direction. Peace, in this state, is not the absence of pain. It is the silent certainty that everything has a place within the larger flow. And it is from this perception that true creative power is born. Not the power of individual will, but that of integrated consciousness. The heart, when it beats in coherence with the field, does not wish, it manifests. What vibrates in harmony finds a path. What is dense dissolves. What is authentic expands. This is the movement of the new energy, not conquered, but remembered. The transformation of pain into wisdom is not a sudden event, but a silent unfolding that reveals itself in small changes of perception. At first, almost nothing seems different, but there is a subtle shift in the way we react. The mind still tries to revive the old pattern, but the body no longer responds with the same intensity. What once was a storm becomes a brief rain, and this softening is the first indication that transmutation has begun. The emotional field is the first to register this change. Before, every memory awakened tension. Now, there is a space between feeling and reacting. That space is the sign of consciousness at work. It does not eliminate the emotion. It simply creates enough distance for it to move without imprisoning. Anger, fear, or sadness may still arise, but they pass like waves on the open sea. Strong, yes, yet incapable of knocking down one who has learned to observe. One of the clearest signs of this transmutation is the emergence of an unexpected tenderness toward one's own pain. There is no longer such urgency to get rid of it, nor the impulse to disguise it. A genuine desire to understand it arises. Emotion ceases to be the enemy and becomes the messenger. This change in the relationship with one's own feeling is profound, for it marks the moment when consciousness stops fighting against what is and begins to flow with what exists. The body also participates in this transformation. Old tensions dissolve, postures change, the gaze softens. The entire organism seems to reorganize into a state of greater receptivity. It is as if the body, realizing that the war is over, can finally rest. This rest is not laziness, it is regeneration. The energy once used to resist is returned to the vital current and becomes fuel for creation and clarity. Another indication is the natural reduction of judgment. As pain transforms into wisdom, the impulse to classify everything as right or wrong loses strength. We begin to perceive that each experience, even the most difficult, had a precise role in the expansion of consciousness. This understanding does not come from the rational mind, but from a broader intelligence that perceives totality. Suffering ceases to be an error and reveals itself as a component of the very alchemy of being. Patience becomes more accessible. What once provoked hurry or frustration is now seen as process. Consciousness understands that nothing ripens by decree. Inner rhythms gain the same respect as the cycles of nature. There is a new sensitivity toward time. Not clock time, but the time of maturation. This serenity before one's own rhythm is one of the most beautiful fruits of transmutation. The way we relate to others also changes. When pain no longer dictates responses, the gaze becomes more compassionate. We begin to recognize in others the same mechanisms that once lived within us. The defenses, the fears, the attempts at control. Empathy grows not as an effort, but as a natural reflection of understanding. Judgment gives way to listening. And in that space, more genuine connections are born, not based on shared pain, but on shared consciousness. At certain moments, the old pain may reappear, but its visit has a different tone. It no longer comes to dominate, but to confirm that the wound has been integrated. It appears as a distant echo, a reminder of where we have been and how much the field has expanded. In these moments, the being realizes that the pain has not disappeared. It has been absorbed by wisdom. It has become lucid memory, not an open wound. There is also a perceptible refinement in the way we feel the world. Emotions become subtler, clearer, more precise. Joy ceases to be euphoria and becomes vibrant serenity. Sadness loses the weight of melancholy and becomes sensitivity. Anger, when it arises, comes with purpose, not destruction. Each emotion finds its natural place within the larger flow, without needing to be denied or exaggerated. Another sign of transmutation is the increase of spontaneous gratitude. Small events, once unnoticed, gain symbolic value. The simple act of breathing, of being alive, of feeling, becomes enough. This gratitude is not learned gratitude, but a state of constant recognition. It is consciousness perceiving the miracle of the ordinary, and that is only possible when pain no longer occupies the whole space of perception. At the deepest point of this process, the being begins to understand that wisdom is not something acquired, but revealed. It has always been present, covered by layers of fear and resistance. When those layers dissolve, what emerges is silent knowing, a heart intelligence that recognizes the invisible order behind contrasts. Pain, when transmuted, does not take sensitivity away. It refines it. Living in this new state is like walking through a familiar landscape under a different light. The world does not change, but the gaze changes completely. What once was threat is now opportunity. What once was loss is now release. What once seemed an ending is now a passage. And every emotion becomes a tuned instrument in the orchestra of consciousness. These are the subtle but unmistakable signs that pain is no longer a prison, but a teacher. The mind quiets, the body harmonizes, and the heart learns a new language to transform every memory into a frequency of wisdom. When this happens, the being ceases to be what suffered and becomes what understood. And understanding is the purest form of healing. When consciousness awakens, pain ceases to be noise and becomes music. Each memory, once dissonant, begins to vibrate in harmony with the whole. Life does not become perfect, it becomes whole. Suffering does not disappear as if by miracle, but transforms into silent wisdom, into presence that breathes in the now. The heart, once divided between fear and desire, finds rest in the simple fact of existing. And in that rest, a new energy arises, light, lucid, and true. If you have felt this vibration and made it this far, write in the comments, "I am ready to live in coherence with my consciousness." Subscribe if you wish to continue this awakening journey and receive more content like this.